The people of the Central Plains normally had a very distinct height difference when compared to the Tibetans, making it difficult to confuse the two. But Wang Chong had long ago ordered all of his soldiers to press their bodies to the backs of their horses. This way, Tibetans would not be able to distinguish at first glance the Tibetans from the people of the Central Plains. Damn it! Damn it! Where is the enemy? Ah! Before he could finish speaking, the Tibetan was run through. His body twitched twice before dropping from his horse. The 4,000-some cavalry had killed 2,000-some Tibetans by this point, and had successfully mixed into the army of 20,000-some soldiers. And if not for the fact that Wang Chong's goal wasn't pure slaughter, this number could have been even higher. Go! Wang Chong didn't continue the fight. The 4,000 cavalry ran through the southeast Tibetan lines and then reined in their horses and took off. Don't fight! Everyone, follow me. Mud splashed into the air as the war horses galloped off. Before the Tibetans even had time to react, the Tang soldiers had left. After them, the Tibetans were furious at this sight. 4,000 Tang soldiers had run through an army of more than 100,000 Tibetans like it was nothing. When had it been possible to humiliate the fierce and courageous Tibetans like this? Follow me. Kill them all. In the pouring rain, a Tibetan officer's eyes went red from bloodlust. With a fierce wave of his scimitar, he pulled on the reins of his horse and charged through the rain like a lightning bolt. Rumble! Behind him, a wave of enraged Tibetans howled and followed behind. Two large forces, one in front and one behind, quickly vanished into the rain. Hurry! In the curtain of rain, Wang Chong urged his horse forward as he urged his army to hasten their speed. The curses behind him traveled far, and Wang Chong could sense that several thousand Tibetans were charging up from behind him. "Milord, they've taken the bait." Old Eagle's familiar voice came from behind him. He was riding a highland steed, urging it forward in a gallop. Old Eagle's body was clearly not suited for Tibetan armor, and Wang Chong had to kill a tall Tibetan officer to get one that barely fit him. "Can you determine how many people?" Wang Chong asked. Old Eagle said nothing, only looked up in the sky. As the bean-sized raindrops slapped on his face, Old Eagle's gaze continued to flit about the skies, watching as the massive eagle made circles. 6,000 to 7,000, Old Eagle replied after muttering to himself. Birds weren't so intelligent that they could count people one by one, but Old Eagle had used various methods to train his eagles to determine the number of people by levels and to express them by drawing images in the sky. "Humph. It looks like the Tibetans aren't looking down on us too much," Wang Chong said with a grim smile. Although their charge had killed around half their number in Tibetans, the Tibetans clearly thought that this was not a problem with their own strength, but because it had been a surprise attack. "Ah, milord." Old Eagle's eyes were still fixed on the sky, though he was no longer watching the eagle he had raised. He had noticed that a gerfalcon had appeared in the thunderclouds. Gerfalcons were a bird of prey originating from Yusang that were used to control the skies. The ones Old Eagle had captured and tamed, however, were for another purpose. In terms of training birds, the Tibetans were still beginners, a far cry from Old Eagle's mastery. Although time had been short and Old Eagle had not been able to train the Tibetan birds to the level of his giant eagles, it had been no problem to teach them some simple lessons. "Huashu Huaitsong has begun to move. Although I can't tell if it's Huashu Huaitsong himself that's begun to move, there's definitely activity in that region." Old Eagle's voice was extremely stern. The advantage to using these hastily trained gerfalcons was the ability to deceive the Tibetans and make them let down their guard. They could not tell which were their birds and which belonged to the enemy, though these birds had originally all been theirs. It would be stranger if Huashu Huaitsong didn't react to such a ruckus. However, the army is currently in battle with Shenyu Zhongtong and his Annan Protectorate army. He won't be able to free up the time to deal with us, so there's an 80 to 90% chance that he's sending one of his 5 tiger generals. We won't need to go over to that area for the time being. Wang Chong's eyes glowed. Although he couldn't see it, he was mostly confident in his judgment of the Tibetan army in that area. "Ignore them. Let's go and bring those fellows behind us to the target area." With these words, Wang Chong urged his horse onward. "Rumble. Don't let them escape." Warhorses thundered forward, the thousands of furious Tibetans charging forward in a black flood of steel, all of them charging at maximum speed. 1,000 zhang, 500 zhang, 300 zhang, 100 zhang. The Tibetans were getting closer and closer, and their eyes were fixed through the gloom on the Tang soldiers ahead of them. None of them noticed that the hills around them were growing more numerous or that they were getting farther and farther from the main army. Boom! When they were less than 60 zhang from their target, the situation suddenly changed. Roar! Nearby, in a pitch-black spot that they had taken to be mud, a bellowing axeman leaped out of the water. Clang! In a flash of cold light, an axehead had cut off a horse's head at the neck. Nay! Horses neighed in alarm, this sneak attack throwing the Tibetans into chaos. The slain warhorse continued to move forward through inertia, throwing its rider smashing into the mud. Splush, splush, splush. 1, 2, 3, 4. In the gloomy hills, one soldier after another began to pop out, using their spears to stab, axes to hack, shields to beat. More and more soldiers were coming out to attack the horses. At such close distances, not even the Tibetans could dodge. One Tibetan after another was thrown from his horse. Cold glints could be seen in the gloom as thousands of Tang infantry closed in from both sides. Aya! Careful! It's an ambush! Tang soldiers! We've been fooled! Retreat! Shrill Tibetan screams filled the air, the faces grimacing in fear within the gloom. They had been so focused on exterminating the 4,000 Tang cavalry that they had never imagined so many Tang infantry to be waiting in ambush nearby. The Annan Protectorate Army. It's another part of the Annan Protectorate Army. Panicked and fearful voices echoed through the skies as the Tibetans finally realized what was happening. It had been no secret that the Annan Protectorate Army had split into two in the rain, and the messengers had sent word that Fengjie and Jiasiluo had been sent to chase them some time ago. Logically speaking, that part of the Annan Protectorate Army should have been far away from this area, but they had inexplicably appeared here. Run! The morale of the Tibetan soldiers had crumbled. Many of them wanted to flee, but it was too late. The earth quaked and warhorses neighed. Wang Chong had turned around with his 4,000 cavalry and returned for the counterattack. Swish! Wherever the spear passed, a rider would be unhorsed. In this battle, Wang Chong was no longer observing from the sidelines, but personally participating. With each fallen Tibetan, a stream of pure energy would flow into Wang Chong's body. In this torrent of rain and blood, Wang Chong's stellar energy not only did not decrease, it grew even more plentiful. Leaping dragon spear. A flood dragon seemed to soar into the dark skies, creating a splash in the rain. Then it crashed back down as fast as a lightning bolt, a spear stabbing into a Tibetan officer 20 zhang away. With Wang Chong's true martial Tier 9 cultivation and the power of the leaping dragon spear, warriors below the profound martial realm were no match for him. This Tibetan officer's body swayed, his eyes wide as he toppled from his horse. In a serious competition, he wouldn't have been so easy to defeat. But on the packed and intense field of battle, one person's strength was greatly reduced. With just a single spear, Wang Chong had managed to bring him down. Congratulations to User. For killing 5 foreign officers, User has unlocked the Martial General Halo? Bane of Generals. Note: Bane of Generals makes you the enemy of all generals, whether of the Central Plains or a foreign kingdom. As long as you regard them as your enemy, they are your enemy and will be weakened by the halo. Functional range. All generals. As the halo is an advanced version of the Bane of the Battlefield. Halo, the Bane of the Battlefield's limit to only soldiers below the general level has now been broken. Notice, User has only unlocked the Martial General Halo. If User wishes to officially activate the Bane of Generals Halo, User must complete an additional mission. A string of messages suddenly appeared in Wang Chong's mind. Rumble. It was like a peal of thunder. Right when Wang Chong was preparing to take care of another Tibetan cavalryman, he was dumbfounded by this sudden transformation. The Martial General Halo? What's that about? Does the bane of the battlefield not count as a martial general halo? Wang Chong was frozen in a stabbing motion, his hands still gripping his spear. The might of the bane of the battlefield halo on the battlefield could reverse the tides. So Wang Chong had always believed that this was a strength that only a general could possess. But this was clearly not the case. Stone of Destiny, what do you mean by the strength of a martial general halo? Wang Chong used the single-character consecutive slash to immediately depart the noisy battlefield while his mind reached out to the Stone of Destiny. Although the Stone of Destiny couldn't respond like a person, it would always reply as long as the answer didn't involve anything too critical. The martial general halo, as seen from its name, is targeted against elite experts at the general level. It can be overlapped with the bane of the battlefield halo. The Stone of Destiny's voice resounded in his mind. Wang Chong frowned and asked, "Does the martial general halo have any other halo effects besides the bane of generals? Or is the martial general halo only the bane of generals halo?" The martial general halo is not limited to the bane of generals halo. It can also target other categories, such as the Arabian halo and the Carrick Spazi new halo, but user must first obtain these. The voice once more replied, "The Arabian halo." Wang Chong's heart pounded at the mention of this name, and thousands of thoughts ran through his mind for a second. Wang Chong had vaguely grasped something, but after thinking about it carefully, he felt like he had grasped nothing at all. "How do I officially activate the bane of generals halo?" Wang Chong sternly asked. The bane of the battlefield halo was extremely powerful, its existence on the battlefield almost heaven-defying. But this halo's flaw was also very obvious. It had absolutely no effect on general-class individuals. Thus, whether it was Bashishing, Batunlu, or Fenjie and the other elite experts, Wang Chong's halo was completely useless against them. But if he had the bane of generals halo, everything would be different. Although the Trial of Destiny had temporarily stopped Wang Chong from gaining any destiny energy, and thus any avenues of gaining strength through the use of destiny energy, the other avenues remained unaffected. If he could activate the martial general halo, it would be a great boon to him on the battlefield. The bane of generals halo requires 1. Killing 10 foreign commanders. 2. Killing 1 profound martial realm expert on the battlefield. 3. Reaching level 3 in the bane of the battlefield halo. Only once all 3 conditions are fulfilled can user officially activate the bane of generals halo. Buzz. Wang Chong's heart immediately sank. The first condition was bearable, but the other 2 conditions were very difficult. The requirements to improve the bane of the battlefield rose exponentially with each level. In the last battle, Wang Chong had led the Annan Protectorate army in killing more than 50,000 Fenjie and Jiasiluo soldiers. But Wang Chong's bane of the battlefield halo still had not reached level 3. Wang Chong could only feel that he wasn't far off from reaching level 3. But as for exactly how far, Wang Chong had no idea. And even so, he still needed to defeat a profound martial realm expert, and the Stone of Destiny had also specified that it had to be on the battlefield. In other words, this condition required Wang Chong to rely on his own strength to defeat a profound martial realm expert. It wasn't like Wang Chong hadn't killed such experts before, but he had killed the majority of them when they couldn't resist, stabbing them with the little Inyang sword to absorb the last bit of stellar energy in their bodies. This was clearly different from the condition that the Stone of Destiny had specified. There's plenty of time. As long as this war goes well, I can definitely fulfill the conditions to activate the bane of General's halo. With this thought, Wang Chong calmed down. In normal circumstances, the Stone of Destiny's conditions would have been impossible to fulfill, but in this large-scale war involving 3 countries, everything was possible. And if he could succeed, the Bane of Generals could play a pivotal role in altering the course of this war. Wang Chong returned to his senses and ordered with a wave of his hand, "Get ready and prepare to depart." The Tibetans could realize at any moment that something has gone wrong. We have to start the next phase as quickly as possible. Around him, the battle in the rain was already dying down. For this ambush, Wang Chong had prepared 20,000 soldiers. 20,000 elites of the Annan Protectorate Army and 4,000 to 5,000 cavalry was a force completely capable of dealing with 6,000 or 7,000 Tibetan cavalry. It had been far too easy. The battle concluded much faster than he had imagined. Under Wang Chong's command, the warriors of the Annan Protectorate Army stripped the deceased Tibetan cavalrymen of their armor. The highland steeds were excellent mounts, and the surviving horses were given to the infantry to ride. With these Tibetan suits of armor and highland steeds, Wang Chong's 4,000 Tibetan cavalry swelled to 8,000. That's enough. Wang Chong gazed at these energetic Tibetans, who clearly did not have faces belonging to the people of the plateau, and nodded his head. The art of war emphasized the need for the proper time, geography, and the unity of the people. In normal circumstances, Wang Chong's tactic would have been very difficult to utilize, but this downpour had allowed for the possibility of success. As long as his soldiers kept their bodies pressed to their horses, they could achieve the perfect disguise. The greatest flaw was the language. The inability to speak Tibetan would easily expose the scheme, but Wang Chong himself could resolve this problem. It was impossible to proficiently learn Tibetan in a short time, but it was a simple matter to pick out a few of the more intelligent soldiers and teach them a few simple phrases to reply with when being questioned. Time is short. Let's go. After picking out a few leaders and splitting the army in two, Wang Chong quickly led the army forward once more. Rumble. The Annan Protectorate Army split into two, one group of cavalry riding south and the other riding north. In a few short moments, they had vanished into the rain. The entire process was as smooth as flowing water, and it felt like they had never appeared. Gallop. War horses could be heard in the distance as black silhouettes approached through the rain. Who goes there? At the base of a mountain, a 5-man Tibetan commander emerged from the army and led his horse out to meet this approaching group, his voice harsh. It's us. We didn't manage to catch those Tang. They were too fast. Damn it! The leader of the Tibetans yelled back, his fist clenched in the air, a look of rage and helplessness on his face. They escaped. The 5-man commander frowned, apparently a little unwilling to accept the result. But wasn't your position over there? Why did you come over to our side? The wrong place. The Tibetan commander seemed shocked, only now realizing that he had gotten lost. He lowered his head and began to mutter to himself. What did you say? The 5-man commander asked, approaching closer. I said Gula. The Tibetan commander's voice was a little garbled. What did you say? I said that we. The storm was truly too loud, and that Tibetan commander's voice became harder and harder to catch. The 5-man commander's brow furrowed, so he stopped asking and rode his horse forward. Humph! At this moment, no one noticed a scornful look flash through the Tibetan commander's eyes as he inwardly sneered. His Tibetan had its limits, as he only knew what Wang Chong had taught him. The rest had been random muttering. However, this distance was enough. Brothers, charge! With a shout, the Tibetan commander shed his disguise. His right hand suddenly raised over his head as he gave the order to attack. Rumble! As if receiving a great shock, the dejected Tibetan cavalry suddenly raised their heads and began to explode with an astonishing aura. Kai-il! The horse flew forward, sending rain splashing everywhere. The several thousand Annan Protectorate soldiers instantly smashed into the unprepared Tibetan army. At the same time, in another place, who? On the great general's orders, we have come to reinforce the northwest. Under the thunder clouds, a Tibetan rode his stalwart horse forward, a banner held high as he led thousands of cavalry through the rain. Boom! And then, under countless stupefied gazes, those thousands of soldiers charged into the army. To the southeast, southwest, northeast, several places were suddenly attacked by their own side. These people were as unpredictable as ghosts, all of them dressed in Tibetan armor, making it impossible to distinguish between Tang and Tibetan. Moreover, they appeared with all kinds of reasons, leading the Tibetans to be completely defenseless. Their way of fighting was also fast and decisive. Before soldiers could arrive from elsewhere, they had already retreated. In this chaos, there were even cases where actual Tibetans attacked actual Tibetans. This continuous turmoil caused the soldiers to panic like easily startled birds. The chain of command began to fall apart, as nobody knew if the ones giving the orders were their officers or the Tang officers. Damn it! Just how many Tang are there? How can we defend against it? They're even wearing our armor. It's impossible to see anything clearly in this rain, and it's getting darker and darker, making the task even more difficult. The Tibetan commanders clenched their fists in irritation. At any other time, this tactic would be suicidal. But right now, the army was attempting to exterminate Xianyu Zhongtong's army on the summit. There were no troops available to hunt down the enemy at their rear. Moreover, there was also an inescapable and objective fact. Although the army had set out at dawn, with all the chasing, fighting, and getting lost, it was now approaching dusk. Even if the thunderclouds dispersed, it was no longer the right period to do any searching. More importantly, despite all the times the Tang army had attacked, the Tibetans still didn't know how many soldiers they had. At the start, the Tibetans had believed that there was only one group. Even though multiples places were being attacked, their opponents were just using the rain to deceive the Tibetans. But this wasn't the case later on, because there were times when 3 places were under simultaneous and large-scale assaults. Coupled with the fact that these people left as quickly as they came, not even the valorous generals of the Ngari royal lineage could determine how many people were hidden in this dark night, much less the ordinary soldier. What are these Tibetans doing? At the same time, on the peak of a high mountain, a fully armored general of the Anan Protectorate looked down the mountain, his brows furrowed in thought. He had a scar on his left brow and gave off an aura as thick and heavy as a mountain. Or are they playing a ruse so as to bait us out? Proposed another general, tall and thin. His armor was spattered with blood and covered in scars left behind by scimitars. It was obvious that he had experienced many fierce battles. In the southwest, veterans like these were fierce and courageous generals. They're not. The general with the scar on his left brow shook his head and said profoundly, although I also thought that the Tibetans were trying to bait us out or make us put down our guard, it's clearly not the case. Huashu Huizong has a very high opinion of himself, and given his personality, he would never lower himself to use such tactics while he holds the upper hand. It would be like drawing legs on a snake. And besides, this certainly doesn't look like any play. But right now, who in the southwestern territory can help us? Could it be the Wang clan father and son? But shouldn't they be far away by now? Did they come back to help us? The tall and thin general grew increasingly doubtful. Subconsciously, he turned to look at his protector general, Xianyu Zhongtong. Xianyu Zhongtong had been appointed by the previous protector general, Zhangqiu Jianxiong. If it wasn't for this incident, even though he lacked the qualifications to completely command the obedience of these soldiers, even though the soldiers still held some objections, all of them would have accepted this result for the sake of Zhangqiu Jianxiong. But right now, everyone knew that the Anan Protectorate army was only united on the surface while internally a complete mess. Otherwise, a large portion of its soldiers wouldn't have left with the Wang clan father and son. However, despite this, there were still many people in the Protectorate army who were willing to follow Xianyu Zhongtong, the successor appointed by Zhangqiu Jianxiong. Victory and defeat were both commonplace for a soldier, and a defeat in battle was not necessarily the fault of a soldier. In the view of a general, the mobilization of both Meng Shizhao and Yusang, a total of over 500,000 soldiers, was not something the Anan Protectorate army could ever have dealt with. Meng Shizhao had never before worked with Yusang. Even if Protector General Zhangqiu Jianxiong were here, he would probably be similarly helpless. I don't know. Xianyu Zhongtong looked down the mountain in silence. To tell the truth, he had rather complicated feelings about the Wang clan father and son. But these feelings were far from anything that could be described as hatred. On the contrary, he felt some gratitude. If the youngest son of the Wang clan hadn't built Lion City, and if the Wang clan father and son hadn't brought soldiers and rallied the morale of his own troops, the Southwest Army would have probably already been wiped out. Xianyu Zhongtong had always understood that while his talent and understanding of the art of war was more than enough to be a general, it was also far from enough to be an influential imperial protector general whose words could shake the world. But everything had been decided by Lord Zhangqiu Jianxiong, and even Xianyu Zhongtong could only accept it. However, no matter what, he was solely responsible for the current plight of the Anan Protectorate army. Although I don't know what's going on, there's one thing that I can be sure of. The one commanding the troops below isn't Wang Yan or his son. Xianyu Zhongtong took in a deep breath as he broke free of his stupor. Even if these generals might only be loyal to him on the surface, as the commander-in-chief Xianyu Zhongtong still had the duty of leading his soldiers out of this predicament. Wang Yan's style is clean and excessively cautious. Given his temperament, he would never use this sort of surprise attack strategy. As for Wang Fu, his intelligence and flexibility surpass his father's as well as mine, but he still wouldn't be able to pull off such a feat. Xianyu Zhongtong had followed the Lord Protector General for many years, and though his strength hadn't reached that level, his insight had. But if it isn't the Wang clan father and son, who else could it be? The Southwest general with the scar on his left brow asked in surprise. Of all the generals of the Southwest at present, those who could match or exceed Xianyu Zhongtong's level in strategy and tactics were only the Wang clan father and son. But if not even they could pull off this sort of strategy, just who was it that was leading these attacks against the Tibetans? The general with the scar on his left brow was stupefied, this answer completely catching him by surprise. Could it be that another formidable figure has appeared in the Southwest? Could it be Li Jingyi? But didn't he die in battle? This general's mind was in turmoil. There's no need to overthink it. No matter where he comes from, there's one thing we can be sure of. He's a friend, not an enemy. Pass on my order. All soldiers should do their utmost to hold the Tibetans down. Xianyu Zhongtong's eyes flashed as he raised his right arm and gave the order. And with Xianyu Zhongtong's order, the entire army rumbled to life. Although he was no master of reckless offensives and proactive assaults, he was a mighty general when it came to infantry defense. Thus, even though Huashu Huaizong had double Xianyu Zhongtong's number of troops, he was still unable to break down Xianyu Zhongtong's forces. Kai Il! War drums thundered as cries of battle filled the sky. The army once more plunged into an intense battle. "Milord, we've been attacked in the southwest. The enemy disguised as our own forces, and we've been dealt heavy casualties. If this continues, the army will collapse. Milord, the southeast has been attacked again." At the base of the mountain, Huashu Huaizong was seated on a highland steed that was taller than a man. Around him, messenger after messenger was riding forward. At the start, Huashu Huaizong had not really cared about these irritating attacks. If battles could be won through these troublemaking methods, battles wouldn't need to be fought. Everyone would just use these strategies. As the personal commander of 100,000 soldiers and the commander-in-chief of the more than 200,000 elites of the Ngari royal lineage, Huashu Huaizong thought of these methods as childish tricks, or to describe it more accurately, self-destruction. But what happened next was completely beyond his expectations. The southeast, the southwest, the northwest. His army was being attacked from every angle, and the order of attack had been completely disrupted. The army in 4 places was in absolute turmoil, and there was no way to order them to attack. Through these harassing attacks, a mere few thousand cavalry had managed to throw an army of 100,000 into utter mayhem. Even someone with Huashu Huaizong's insight could have never conceived this sort of plan. When did such a formidable figure appear in the Annan Protectorate army? Huashu Huaizong's eyes shone with almost physical rays of chilling light. After all these harassing attacks, Huashu Huaizong finally began to realize that he had made a mistake. His enemy's abilities in the art of war were stupendous and not something any normal general could possess. To put it more accurately, before this, Huashu Huaizong had never believed that anyone could make harassing attacks produce this much of an effect. "Milord, what should we do? What if your subordinate takes some soldiers and focuses on dealing with them?" Longkinba's familiar voice rang out by his ear. This tiger general was already furious at the chaos caused by these raids. But he didn't feel that there was anything to be afraid of. If he could catch them once, he could immediately slay them all. But for some reason, he had not managed to catch them even once. It was like he was snatching at air. He had laid down many ambushes, but none of them had managed to seize the enemy. Longkinba had begun to wonder if his own luck was absolutely awful or if there was some other reason behind his failures. "There's no need." Huashu Huaizong waved his hands. "A large-scale mobilization can't be hidden from the enemy's eyes and ears. Moreover, this will result in a scattering of our forces. Most importantly, someone is already keeping a watch on you. It doesn't matter where you go. You won't be able to do anything. With these final words, Huashu Huizong looked at this trusted general with a profound gaze. The dissatisfied Longqinba was instantly dumbfounded. Huashu Huizong coldly snorted and indifferently said, "Humph. Did you really think that you still haven't been able to encounter the enemy once just because your luck was bad?" He had never believed in coincidence, only in his own eyes. Longqinba was definitely being watched. But how could that be possible? Longqinba said, his face covered in shock. There were 100,000 Tibetan warriors here, the base of the mountain range dense with their ranks. How could the enemy pin down his position? In truth, if he were in the enemy's position, even Longqinba would have found it difficult to keep track of where he was. In truth, this was simply impossible. This answer was too shocking, and it was far more important than the fact that Longqinba wasn't able to catch the raiders and give them a harsh lesson. "There is nothing in this world that is impossible," Huashu Huizong lightly said. Ignoring Longqinba, he slowly raised his chin, seeming to unintentionally look up to the sky. Longqinba was left alone with his thoughts. "No, it's not impossible." Longqinba had a flash of insight, and his entire body trembled in shock. He suddenly raised his head, following Huashu Huizong's to look up at the sky. Above him, the dark clouds hung low, lightning snaking through them and the pouring rain pounding against his face. But there was nothing else in those dark clouds. No, there must be something. Longqinba clenched his fists, an indescribable feeling in his heart. Although he couldn't see anything, he felt certain that there was something behind those clouds. "It seems like your reaction isn't that slow," Huashu Huizong indifferently said, his voice much calmer now. Although Longqinba had been a little slow, he had finally responded. In this rainy weather and the vast number of Tibetans around them, accurately keeping an eye on one person's movements was almost impossible. But almost impossible was not the same as impossible. At the very least, if one looked down from the skies, Longqinba's movements were no secret. "The enemy has most likely concluded that, as commander-in-chief, I have to remain in the middle of the army to oversee the troops, and there are only a few people that I can send. Bashishing is guarding the passes, and Jiasiluo is with the Mengshi Zhao Crown Prince. So only you few are left. Of the 5 tiger generals, you are the strongest, so they only need to keep an eye on you." Huashu Huizong's eyes glowed like torches, seeming to see the truth. If Wang Chong were here and heard these words, he would definitely be stunned, because this really was the truth. Huashu Huizong was praised in the southwest as someone who could stand shoulder to shoulder with Xianxia Jianxiong. It now seemed that this really was the case and that he could not be underestimated. "Longqinba, go to the southeast and lure them over. As for me, this farce has gone on long enough. It's time for me to step out as well." Huashu Huizong waved his hand and pressed on the flanks of his horse, galloping to the southwest with several dozen of his personal guards. "No matter who you are, as long as you continue this game, you'll definitely come over. I will be waiting." Huashu Huizong closed his eyes. His face was cold and emotionless, but his mind was a hive of activity. Although he had remained in the middle of the army this entire time, he had not come away empty-handed. The Tang attacks seemed random and disorderly, but Huashu Huizong had already caught on to their pattern. If everything went as expected, their next assault would be on the southwest. And no matter who his enemy was this time, he would wipe them all out. As this thought flashed through his mind, Huashu Huizong drew back his aura, becoming like a ghost as he swiftly vanished into the storm. "Young master, where should we attack next?" Under the cover of the dark rainstorm, Wang Chong and Old Eagle gathered up their soaked soldiers. Wang Chong's strategy had already shown its effectiveness. The Tibetan army surrounding the mountain range was in chaos and could no longer wholeheartedly attack the Annan Protectorate army. In all of his career, Old Eagle had never fought in such a carefree and contented manner. It had felt like dancing on the edge of a blade. They had been fighting more than 100,000 Tibetan cavalry, and the slightest mistake would have resulted in instant death. But under Wang Chong's arrangements, each strike was more frightening than risky. It had felt like they had the Tibetans in the palms of their hands, stirring them into complete turmoil. This was completely different from what Old Eagle had imagined. The cold-blooded and cruel battlefield where one could die at any moment. For a moment, Old Eagle even had to admit that he had become intoxicated by this feeling. We can no longer attack. To Old Eagle's surprise, Wang Chong completely rejected the notion. Don't forget that the Tibetans have Huashu Huaizong. Our success was partially because we had the right plan, but another part was that Huashu Huaizong underestimated us. He might have ignored us earlier, but now that things have reached this point, if Huashu Huaizong doesn't come out, he'll truly be letting down his title of Great General. Ah! Old Eagle was dumbfounded. That feeling of playing around with the 100,000 Tibetan soldiers, of having a powerful opponent in the palm of one's hand, had been so intoxicating that they had momentarily forgotten that the Tibetan army had still not moved. Huashu Huaizong, as the great general presiding over the center of the Tibetan army, had never budged from his position. As if a bucket of water had been poured over his head, Old Eagle shivered and came back to his senses. Individuals on the level of Imperial Great General were all influential people. Though their strength couldn't completely reverse the tides of a battle, they could still decide between victory and defeat. In their current status, they were fine if they didn't run into Huashu Huaizong, but if they did, their 4,000 or 5,000 cavalry were truly useless against someone of his level. At the very least, it was an easy task for him to deal them a heavy blow. They could get lucky for a moment, but they couldn't be lucky forever. After playing so long, it's about time to put away the toys. Wang Chong glanced at Old Eagle and paused. Moreover, did you forget what our goal was? Young Master's lesson is correct. I was being careless. BZZT. Old Eagle shivered, his body breaking out into a cold sweat. Indeed, from the very start, Wang Chong had clearly stated that the goal of these constant harassing attacks was not pure slaughter. With their army alone, it was simply impossible to rout Huashu Huaizong's army. Their goal had only been to hold them down. But this was not their ultimate goal. "Milord, what should we do next?" Old Eagle sternly said. "Humph. After harassing them for so long, it's time for us to move to the next step. Pass on my order and tell them to begin to move. In addition, send a message to Protector General Xianxia on the summit. Without their cooperation, we won't be able to do this." Wang Chong's gaze crossed through the vast distances to rest on the summit of that mountain. The Great Tang would engage in a decisive battle with Yusang, but that day was not today, not now. The task at hand was to lead Xianxia Zhongtong and the tens of thousands of troops under him safely out of this area. This was the true goal of this undertaking. "Yes, young master," Old Eagle firmly replied, his attitude one of absolute respect. He paused and then remembered something. "Then, young master, I'll also call back the others." "No!" Wang Chong shook his head, a profound look in his eyes. As he looked up at the thick thunder clouds overhead, an astonishing light flashed through his eyes. "They have to continue. If they don't continue, how can we succeed?" Old Eagle was flabbergasted, looking in confusion at Wang Chong, clueless as to what he was thinking. Wang Chong had just rejected his suggestion, but now he was saying that the attacks had to continue. These were two completely different decisions, leaving Old Eagle utterly perplexed as to what Wang Chong was thinking. Ha! Wang Chong knew what Old Eagle was thinking, but he only chuckled, giving no further explanation. Slowly turning his head, Wang Chong peered into the gloom, looking toward the southwestern region of the mountain range. "Huashu Huaizong, if everything goes as planned, you should be there, right? With your intelligence, you've definitely noticed." But unfortunately, Wang Chong's eyes shone with a fiery light as he ended this line of thought. In this world, Huashu Huaizong was definitely one of the most elite existences. Individuals on the level of Imperial Great Generals were on a completely different from ordinary renowned and valorous generals, both in intelligence and in martial arts. A normal general would truly be no match for Huashu Huaizong. Alas, Huashu Huaizong was facing Wang Chong. Not even this great general of the Yusang Empire could have imagined that his opponent had been praised by the entire world as war saint in his last life. I didn't think that we would finally contend against each other, even if it's only through this method for now, Wang Chong quietly said to himself. In his last life, one of Wang Chong's greatest regrets was that he had missed out on that generation of greats, lost out on the chance to match wits with those dazzling imperial great generals and marshals whose reputations had been known throughout the world. This was the generation where the stars of generals shone brilliantly in the night sky, but in his last life, when he had become the most renowned war saint, there were no more brilliant generals to contend with. This had always been one of Wang Chong's profound regrets. And now, his wish had been fulfilled. Despite the fact that this confrontation between generals would decide the fate of the Great Tang and Yusang for the next several decades and the almost 1 million civilians of the Southwest, this war was one that Wang Chong couldn't lose. Old Eagle, come over. In a little while, I'll have an order for you to carry out. Wang Chong came back to his senses, his eyes regaining their focus. Yes, young master. Old Eagle's eyes brightened as Wang Chong whispered into his ear. In the end, he gave a deferential yes, and swiftly left to carry out the order. The darkness at the base of the mountains seemed still, especially when compared to that earth-shaking battle taking place around the mountains, where thundering war drums resounded through the heavens. Those Tang soldiers wearing Tibetan armor and riding Highland steeds had affected the disposition of the Tibetan army, drawing away a large number of their soldiers. At the base of the mountain, all the soldiers were standing on guard, their primary mission not to deal with Xinyu Zhongtong and the Annan Protectorate Army, but to deal with the phantom-like Tang army. The skies continued to darken as the day grew late. To the southwest, a group of people were warily peering through the gloomy storm. Rumble. Thunder pealed as the sound of horse hooves could be heard in the distance. It had been almost inaudible first, but the sound was gradually growing louder. The Tibetans instantly grew tense. Who goes there? Halt! No one is permitted to approach. A Tibetan officer placed his hands on his scimitar as he shouted in Tibetan into the rain. Take off your helmet and state your name and rank. Behind the officer, more and more Tibetans rode forward, their eyes fixed on the distance as they pulled out their scimitars. However, this was all they did. None of them acted recklessly, as they had made the mistake several times of attacking their own people. Their minds were in panic at the moment. On one hand, they had to doubt the identity of these visitors, but on the other hand, they had to worry about mistakenly killing their own people. Until they had determined the identity of these visitors, all the Tibetans were stuck in a dilemma. Gallop! The horses continued to gallop closer, and finally, black and malevolent figures emerged out of the rain as if emerging from the netherworld. Don't do anything. We're on your side. A Tibetan voice emerged out of the dark night. As those people spoke, they quickly approached. BZZT. Not only did the atmosphere not lighten up, it grew even tenser. 50 Tibetan cavalrymen pressed their hands against their scimitars, the veins bulging on their arms. Take off your helmets. Stop. Don't get any closer. Just who in the world are you? Bastard. Didn't we say to not get any closer? Everyone began to get nervous, because as they were speaking, those horsemen continued to approach, not stopping at all. We're not enemies. That voice came out from the darkness as it continued to get closer. Everyone be careful. There's something off about these fellows. Even the slowest among them could tell how tense the atmosphere was now. After all that they had experienced, everyone was extremely careful. But none of them dared to strike, as they still could not be sure who the horsemen were. The rain continued to pour down, drowning out all noise. No one could be sure that these horsemen had heard them. After all, such things had happened before. Humph! Someone coldly snorted. No one noticed that one of the people in the crowd had clenched their fists as they watched those black silhouettes slowly approach, and begun to laugh the grim laugh of death. When everyone else was worried about the oncoming horsemen, that person looked at them like they were ants walking to their deaths. Come! Huashu Huaizong looked at the approaching horsemen like they were corpses. At this moment, Huashu Huaizong was dressed in the armor of an ordinary soldier and had withdrawn his aura. He had concealed any sign that he was an imperial great general. Even Longkinba probably wouldn't be able to recognize him, not even if he was standing right next to him. However, this ordinary soldier still contained that strength that could annihilate an entire unit of soldiers. 600 zhang. 500 zhang. 400 zhang. As the horsemen got closer and closer, Huashu Huizong remained hidden and unmoved, but the killing intent in his eyes thickened. 300 zhang. This distance was already quite dangerous. If they continued, if they went forward just a little more, these people would enter his range. And as long as they were less than 100 zhang from him, not a single one of them would be able to escape. The strength of a single imperial great general could easily annihilate them. Bzzzt. The horse hooves suddenly stopped. Without any warning, this unit of horsemen had suddenly stopped moving. Twang twang twang. Before anyone could react, bows twanged, and a sky-covering volley of arrows landed on the Tibetan army. Aya! Screams filled the air as this sudden assault stupefied everyone. Even Huashu Huizong was left astonished. Not even he had expected these people to change their plans and use arrows to attack. And even more shocking was what happened after that. Rumble. War horses neighed as these strange black silhouettes immediately turned around and fled as soon as they fired their volley of arrows. Before anyone else could react, this army was already at a distance of 500 zhang. Astonishment, surprise, shock, countless complicated expressions appeared on the faces of the Tibetans, all of them stunned by this sight. Kill them! Rumble! While everyone was still stunned by this sudden turn of events, a person leaped out, pursuing the fleeing horsemen like a lightning bolt. Do you think you can escape? Huashu Huizong's cruel and callous voice resounded like a giant gong. His attacks preceded him, red lotuses dropping from the sky like meteors onto the soldiers of the Anan Protectorate army and fiercely exploding. Aya! War horses neighed as countless figures were thrown into the air by a tyrannical stellar energy, screaming as they were torn into countless pieces while the horses were smashed into pulp. Fierce red flames filled the sky as a flood of energy, almost like the sun itself, expanded to fill every inch of space with scorching fire. Huashu Huizong's stellar energy was so fierce and domineering that it felt like a blazing sun rose in any place that he covered with his stellar energy. These flames were so thick that even the sky seemed to blaze. Before the rain pouring down from the skies could hit the ground, it evaporated into white trails of steam. As flecks of flesh and ash drifted down from the skies, they spread an aura of fear. Huashu Huizong's power had already surpassed everyone's expectations. Before him, everyone felt like insignificant ants. Huashu Huizong's vast energy inspired endless fear in all who felt it. Run! It's Huashu Huizong. Only he has a stellar energy that can unleash this sort of fiery light. We're no match for him. Run! Only General and the others can deal with him. The war horses galloped off as an intense fear gripped everyone's hearts, a sword of Damocles hanging over their heads that spurred them to flee. Their faces were all ghastly pale without a single trace of blood. The Great Tang and Yusang were mortal enemies in the southwest, so all of these soldiers knew of Huashu Huizong's reputation. And in this southwest war, the Anan Protectorate army had battled the Tibetans for more than a month now. All of them were extremely familiar with Huashu Huizong's energy. Those blazing red lotuses and that sea of flame that burned everything to cinders were nightmares that haunted the sleep of everyone in Lion City. And even more shocking was that Wang Chong had spent a great deal of time refining this plan. 300 zhang should have been a safe distance. But no one had expected Huashu Huizong's powers to be at this stage. A distance that would have limited other experts didn't even exist to someone like him. In just a few moments, their forces had been dealt a heavy blow. Their horses, halos, armor, weapons, and cultivation were all meaningless before Huashu Huizong. With a single move, Huashu Huizong had shattered the vigorous fighting force of the Tang army. Humph! Don't you think it's a little too late to run away now? Huashu Huizong looked at the Anan Protectorate soldiers fleeing like startled birds and inwardly sneered, a powerful killing aura exploding from his body. As the commander-in-chief, he could not lightly make a move, but since he had already decided to act, he would not let a single person escape. And it was about time for this farce that had stirred up so much trouble to end. In these circumstances, If he let these raiding Tang soldiers escape, he would truly be letting down his title of Yusang Great General. All soldiers, hear my order. Kill all of these Tang. Don't leave a single one alive. As he charged forward, Huashu Huizong ordered his soldiers to attack. Awu! Kill them! Excited roars filled the skies, sounding like the rumbling of an avalanche. The momentum was so astonishing that even Huashu Huizong couldn't help but arch a brow. Kill them! Damn it! We've finally caught them. It really was them, and they still dared to come when the great general was here. They were truly seeking their own deaths. Bastards! These Tang men are dead for sure. The collective rage and discontent of the Tibetans were instantly unleashed. They had fought for so long but had not managed to catch a single Tang soldier. On the contrary, they had been playing in the palm of the great Tang's hand, been thrown into disarray, and even ended up killing their own soldiers. This was an absolute disgrace. Finally, they had a chance to vent these vile emotions. Rumble! Like a river breaking through a dam, the Tibetan cavalry crazily howled, charging with unprecedented speed as they followed Huashu Huizong. 500 zhang. 400 zhang. 300 zhang. The Tibetans in their frenzied chase were swiftly closing the distance. And the Tang soldiers in front of them, perhaps because they had never expected Huashu Huizong to show up here, seemed to be in a great panic, their entire formation in chaos. An excellent chance. Chaos for the Tang was a superb opportunity for the Tibetans. Rumble! Like a lightning bolt searing through the void, the dense ranks of the Tibetan cavalry thrust into the Tang army. Bang bang bang! As scimitars sliced, figures were cut down off their horses like stalks of wheat. Yet right when they were most excited and most expectant, all their cries suddenly came to a halt. It was like some invisible hand had clasped around their necks and seized their throats. All their faces were stupefied, and even Huashu Huizong was dumbfounded. How can this be? The army quickly began to slow, and a young general dismounted and looked in complete stupefaction at the Tang soldiers that they had killed. The Tang soldiers were certainly dead, but they looked completely different from what the Tibetans had imagined. The dead Tang soldiers were completely different from the Tang soldiers these soldiers remembered. Their faces were all flushed with the sort of plateau red that one would only see if one spent long periods at high altitudes, battered by the winds. In fact, this was actually the red flush characteristic of the plateau. Damn it! They aren't even Tang. They're Tibetans. These Tang used our Tibetan dead to disguise themselves. A Tibetan officer roared in anger. Those Tang soldiers pressed against the backs of the horses weren't Tang at all, but Tibetans who had been killed when chasing Wang Chong's initial force, or been killed in battle. This sneak attack seemed to be quite the large one, but other than a few Tang soldiers at the start, it was completely made up of slain Tibetans. We've been tricked. At the head of the army, Huashu Huizong sat on his massive horse, his eyebrow raised. He had only predicted the opening, but he had failed to predict the end. His opponent was far craftier than he had imagined. This sneak attack plan had so thoroughly jumbled the true and false, the real and illusion, that even he had been fooled by this assault. At this moment, Huashu Huizong suddenly had a very bad feeling. Boom! At this moment, a burst of heaven-shaking shouts came from the northeast, resounding through the curtains of rain. The originally quiet northeast suddenly turned into a din of fighting, roaring, and clanging of weapons. Countless people were charging out of the rain and into the Tibetan defensive line. Not good. Huashu Huizong's eyes widened as he realized what had happened. I've fallen for the Tang's scheme to lure the tiger from the mountain. Hiya! Huashu Huizong immediately turned his horse around and took off for the battlefield. At this stage, the situation was already completely out of his control. Even Huashu Huizong at his slowest would have figured out by now that this sneak attack strategy had been a feint, with the true target now obvious. All the previous sneak attacks had been for the sake of this single moment. The geography of the southwest was very flat, dotted by a few hills. In these circumstances, it was extremely difficult to hide an army. Yet Huashu Huizong had been completely unaware that an army had been so close. Someone who could conceal an army so well had an almost perfect grasp of the proper time and distance. This was not something any ordinary renowned general could have. For the Southwest to still have this sort of character, Huashu Huizong had to admit that he had truly underestimated them. Retreat, hurry. Do everything you can to stop them. In a great hurry, Huashu Huizong loudly ordered his troops to pull back. However, even this Yusang great general whose name was known throughout the Southwest had still miscalculated. From the very start of this plan to lure the tiger away from the mountain, Wang Chong had never planned to give him a chance to come back. Hurry! 12th Unit, loose spears. High up on the mountain, Wang Chong had mixed into the army, where he was issuing order after order. The infantry, axemen, spearmen, cavalry, shieldmen, and master archers all worked together under Wang Chong's order, steadily advancing up the mountain, piece by piece. Unlike the previous sneak attacks, Wang Chong's method of attack was completely unexpected. A frontal assault. He made no attempts to hide it. To the complete surprise of the Tibetans, the Tang army of 40 to 50,000 chose to engage in a frontal assault, and the northeast corner just so happened to be where their defenses were weakest. Through the constant sneak attacks, Wang Chong had already gained an understanding of the Tibetans' order of battle and the disposition of their forces. The Tibetans had no secrets that they could hide from Wang Chong. Hurry! Time is short. We've already distracted Huashu Huizong, so we have to pierce through the Tibetan formations as quickly as possible and bring the Annan Protectorate Army out of here, Wang Chong said. Wang Yan, Old Eagle, Chun Shu Sun, and Commandant Su Shiping and Su Anduin were gathered around Wang Chong, carrying out Wang Chong's will and pushing the army forward like an inexorable tide. Clang, clang, clang. The cry of metal against metal was ceaseless as whistling arrows, flying spears, and the clash of scimitar against sword mixed into a single clamor. To the southeast, the Tibetans were caught between two armies and had completely crumbled. Wang Chong's attack was extremely incisive, and the place he had chosen to start his attack was where the Tibetans were weakest. His soldiers worked in perfect harmony, leaving no gaps in their defense and completely taking the Tibetans by surprise. On the summit, Xinyu Zhongtong had already received Wang Chong's letter via pigeon, so his entire army was cooperating by attacking the northeast. With armies pressing in from both sides, one could easily imagine the situation in the northeast. Flee! How could there be so many? It's the Wang clan father and son. They've come back. We can't stop them. Where's the great general? Only the great general can deal with them. Only the great general will have a plan. The Tibetans were never easy to subdue, but the situation was stronger than a man. Simultaneously confronting the attacks from both Wang Chong and Xinyu Zhongtong and the effects of the halo of Dusk Stallion and Bane of the battlefield had made the Tibetans easy to subdue. The northeast lines collapsed far faster than anyone could have imagined. Wang Chong had given no time for Huashu Huizong to return before piercing through the Tibetan lines. Lord Wang, it really was you. On the summit, everyone had been drenched by the rain. Xinyu Zhongtong was standing on the summit, and as he saw Wang Yan approach, he was at first shocked and then elated. Xinyu Zhongtong had long known who had come to rescue him, but he was still surprised to see Wang Yan appear at this time, even though he should have retreated a long time ago. Xinyu Zhongtong felt greatly moved that the troops led by Wang Yan had chosen to not give up on him. Lord Protector General, you've misunderstood. I was not the commander of this army. It was my son, Wang Chong. Wang Yan sternly said in response to Xinyu Zhongtong's words. Without any other words, he took a step to the side to yield the path to Wang Chong. Lord Xinyu, long time no see. Wang Chong didn't stand on ceremony. With a brush of his sleeve, he stepped forward, passing his father and appearing before Xinyu Zhongtong. Young Master Chong? Xinyu Zhongtong's eyes went wide upon seeing Wang Chong, and an incredulous expression came over his face. Xinyu Zhongtong had met Wang Chong before, during Zhangzhou Jianxiong's banquet in the capital. Zhangzhou Jianxiong had seemed to treat Wang Chong favorably and with great interest, and for this reason, Xinyu Zhongtong had a very deep impression of Wang Chong. Moreover, Xinyu Zhongtong had some understanding of Wang Chong's deeds. What he had done in the capital, including the storm he had stirred in the court, were not things that any ordinary person could do. And this youth seemed to have the regard of the sage emperor as well. It wasn't possible for Xinyu Zhongtong to not know who he was. Besides, the 80,000 soldiers of the Anan Protectorate Army had been saved by the Lion City that Wang Chong had constructed. Xinyu Zhongtong was actually filled with gratitude for that young Master Chong in the faraway capital, even though Wang Chong was still a teenager with no official rank or title of nobility. Young Master Chong, so it was you. Xinyu Zhongtong hurriedly stepped forward and clasped Wang Chong's hands, his expression extremely moved. For Wang Chong to suddenly descend from the heavens and appear was nothing less than a miracle. Xinyu Zhongtong would have never expected this. Wang Chong was also shocked. He had never expected Xinyu Zhongtong to have this sort of attitude. After all, he was a protector general of the empire, someone who stood on the same level as Geshu Han and Zhang Shogue, though his reputation might not be up to par. Lord Protector General, this isn't the time to talk about such things. I've already lured the tiger, Huashu Huaitsong, from the mountain. However, he could come back at any time. Time is short, and we have to leave immediately. Wang Chong didn't mince words. He opened his palm to reveal the private token that Zhangzhou Jianxiong had given him. The battlefield was changing all the time, and anything could happen. The smallest moment of negligence could lead the army to its destruction. Wang Chong didn't dare to make this sort of mistake, because no one could bear the consequences. This is the token that Lord Zhangzhou gave to me, and seeing the token is the same as seeing the person. Lord Protector General, before I came here, Lord Zhangzhou asked me to tell you that the past is the past. The urgent task at hand is to preserve strength and maintain the structure of the Anan Protectorate Army. As for the matter of the Southwest, all will be done according to my orders, and I request Lord Protector General's full protections. This is Lord Zhangzhou's order. As he spoke, Wang Chong took out a white envelope. Xinyu Zhongtong was an imperial protector general. No matter what status he had held before, he was currently the commander-in-chief of the Southwest, and one single token couldn't change this. Zhangzhou Jianxiong's personal token and his handwritten letter were both needed to gain Xinyu Zhongtong's trust. This had also been the reason for Wang Chong's visit to Zhangzhou Jianxiong. Chong-er. Upon seeing the letter and token in Wang Chong's hands, Wang Yan, Chun Shu-sun, Su Shiping and the others were all flabbergasted. The token was one thing, but the letter was something that none of them had known about. Not even Wang Yan had expected Wang Chong to come with the purpose of taking the reins of command from Xinyu Zhongtong. Wang Yan's face hardened as he sternly rebuked, "Chong-er, what are you doing? Messing around. Take a step back for me." But Wang Chong acted like he didn't hear. His eyes remained fixed on Xinyu Zhongtong. The rain continued to pour down, but Wang Chong was using stellar energy to prevent any of it from falling on the letter. He didn't have much time, and the sounds of fighting filled the air. Before coming, he had hypothesized that Xinyu Zhongtong wouldn't refuse the order, but if Xinyu Zhongtong did refuse, Wang Chong really wouldn't be able to do anything. Hiss! Xinyu Zhongtong couldn't hear anything, his gaze moving between the black token in one of Wang Chong's hands and the letter in the other. With a deep breath, he instantly calmed down. He didn't even need to open Wang Chong's letter to recognize it as being personally written by Lord Zhangzhou Jianxiong. Wang Chong held both Zhangzhou Jianxiong's token and his handwritten letter, putting Wang Chong's credibility beyond question. Xinyu Zhongtong had never imagined that the Lord Protector General would hand over command of the Southwestern Army to a mere teenager. And this was someone who had no relationship with the Anan Protectorate Army. For a moment, a whole host of thoughts surged through Xinyu Zhongtong's mind. As he looked at the extremely familiar token and letter, and thought about the strange movements taking place around the base of the mountain, Xinyu Zhongtong suddenly understood. There's no need. Xinyu Zhongtong pushed away the letter proffered by Wang Chong. There was no need for him to see it anymore. Since Lord Zhangzhou had already given his own token to this youth, the meaning was loud and clear. The letter was redundant. As Lord Zhangzhou has already given the order, then everything will be as young master says. Everyone, hear my order. Gather the army and break the encirclement. Xinyu Zhongtong gave his last order for this battle. Boom! The army on the mountain range responded, their spirits rallying. For Xinyu Zhongtong to so happily hand over the reins of command left even Wang Chong surprised, much less Wang Yan, Chen Shusun, and the others. Everyone, hear my order. Break out of the encirclement. Inwardly rejoicing, Wang Chong pressed the flanks of his horse and immediately charged down the mountain, at the same time giving the order for the army to break out. Rumble. A breakout attempt that would decide the fate of the empire and the course of the Southwest began. I didn't think that it would actually be him. In the darkness, Wang Chong had no idea that a pair of eyes was silently watching him from the back. Though he had speculations at the start, Wang Chong's order now made everything clear. The sneak attacks conducted on the army that had made the Tibetans exhausted from running around had been commanded by nobody else but that youth currently charging down the mountain. No wonder the Lord Protector General gave him command over the army. Xinyu Zhongtong had long ago heard of Wang Chong's ability, but not even he had imagined that he wasn't just skilled in court politics. He was actually a talented general as well. Although he was a little surprised, after carefully thinking about it, Xinyu Zhongtong also felt relieved. A teenager was actually a far better commander than a renowned general of the empire. This sounded absurd, and anyone else would find the fact almost impossible to accept. But if it was referring to Wang Chong, when Xinyu Zhongtong thought about the regional commander's incident, and about that lion city that seemed to have miraculously appeared to save the lives of his soldiers, he felt relieved. It's unexpected, but it still is the Wang clan father and son. Xinyu Zhongtong bitterly laughed in his heart as he mounted his horse and urged it through the rain. At the start, Xinyu Zhongtong had determined that the commander of the sneak attacks down below hadn't been Wang Yan or his son, Wang Fu. In the end, however, facts had still proved that it was still the Wang clan father and son. Wang Chong was also a son of the Wang clan. Cavalry in front, shield men on the perimeter, spearmen inside. All soldiers advance. Master archers, prepare to receive my orders at any time. 20 steps forward and to the left, cavalry, charge and scatter them. To the right, 210 steps, archers, concentrated fire. The two armies merged into an avalanche whose momentum and sharpness swept away everything before it. In terms of numbers, the Annan Protectorate army was now not that inferior to the Tibetan army. In the northeast region, in fact, the Great Tang already completely outnumbered the Tibetans. Wang Chong's orders were always preempting his enemies, and before the Tibetans had even begun to form a resistance, they were assaulted and intercepted by Wang Chong. Xinyu Zhongtong and his forces encountered barely any resistance, sweeping down like a flood and reaching the base of the mountain. Under the charge of almost 100,000 soldiers, the Tibetans in the northeast were completely routed, the disorder spreading like a wave all the way down to the base of the mountain. Bastard! In the distance, Longkinba was furious, his eyes red with rage. The moment he had sensed the turmoil, he had immediately begun riding over, but even after all this time, he had still been unable to reach the site of battle. All along the way, he had been obstructed by panicked and fleeing Tibetan cavalry. One or two people fleeing was nothing much, but when thousands of people were fleeing, trying to fight against it was like trying to swim against the course of a flood. Even a renowned general like Longkinba could do nothing about it. By consecutively executing 6 or 7 runaways, he had only barely managed to stop the retreat, but he was still incapable of halting the chaos in the army, much less getting closer to the site of battle. Longkinba was so furious that his entire body was shaking. In this journey down south from the Tibetan plateau, Longkinba had done as he pleased, but now, his divine strength was incapable of being exerted, serving no purpose. The damn Tang. Flee then, run. I'd like to see if your 100,000 forces can grow wings and outrun highland steeds. The fires of rage seethed in Longkinba's heart, his eyes spitting fire as he stared at the distant Tang army. Everyone, hear my order. All soldiers should break out to the north. Do not stop. At almost the same time, Wang Chong was hurriedly ordering the army to move north. Young master, in truth, we don't need to be in this much of a rush. A voice suddenly came from Wang Chong's side. A 40-some-year-old general of the Annan Protectorate army with dark skin had ridden up, his gaze occasionally looking around at the broken Tibetan forces with deep emotion. With our armies now united, our numbers are now comparable to the Tibetans. While the Tibetans are fleeing and the situation is in our favor, perhaps, we could turn around and attack them, dealing the Tibetans a heavy blow. He had not originally had this sort of plan. But when he saw how Wang Chong had routed the Tibetan army, leaving all of them milling around in disorder, he couldn't help but consider the idea. Defeating these Tibetans and defeating Huashu Huaizong would be a massive victory for the Great Tang and would raise the morale of the army. "You're one of the generals under Lord Shenyu?" Wang Chong was very familiar with the Annan Protectorate army generals who had followed his father, knowing their faces even if he hadn't spoken to them. But this general, Wang Chong had never seen him before. This? Yes. The dark-skinned general stared blankly for a moment before nodding, confused as to why Wang Chong had asked this question. "Ah, then I can't blame you. Let me ask you, the Tibetans have arrayed their soldiers into 4 regions. The northeast Tibetans have been routed, but what of the Tibetans in the southwest or the northwest? And have you seen any of the Tibetan generals like Huashu Huaizong or Longqinba in this battle?" Wang Chong lightly said. "No, I can't say that I have," the general said in shame. "Since we've only routed one of 4 sides, Longqinba hasn't appeared, and Huashu Huaizong hasn't appeared, we shouldn't even talk about defeating them. Moreover, have you forgotten that the more than 300,000 soldiers of Meng Shizhao are still waiting in the wings? If we get into a battle with the Tibetans and both of us come away with severe losses, and then Meng Shizhao appears, what will we do? What will happen to the civilians of the southwest? Have you forgotten what the true duty of the Annan Protectorate is?" Wang Chong's voice grew harsher and harsher as he went on. "Annan, protect the south." A protectorate had never existed purely for the sake of war, because wars would never end. The ultimate goal of these wars was to protect a single direction. This was the purpose of Annan, Anbei, and Ong and Anshi. But when a warrior spent too long engaged in battle, they would forget the duty that had been placed on their shoulders. The dark-skinned Annan Protectorate army general instantly paled, unable to speak for a few moments. "Let's go. The Great Tang will have to fight with Yusang and Meng Shizhao one day, but it's not now, and they will pay the price for their actions. And it won't be this small." With these words, Wang Chong urged his horse forward. He had many more tasks to handle. "Young master, what should we do about Longqinba?" Chun Shusun only glanced at the dark-skinned general before immediately following. He had been slightly too far away to hear exactly what Wang Chong had been talking about with the general. He had other concerns. "We might have lured away Huashu Huaizong, but Longqinba and the other generals aren't easy to deal with. Although Longqinba isn't as powerful as Huashu Huaizong, the discrepancy isn't that large. He or the other Tibetan generals could show up at any moment. There's no need to worry. He won't be able to get here." Wang Chong grinned and leisurely waved his hand. "Ah!" Chun Shusun was left speechless, looking in shock and confusion at Wang Chong. "You still haven't realized it? I'm already controlling the Tibetans to our left and right. As long as these 2 sides remain in turmoil, Longqinba won't be able to come no matter how much of a rush he's in. Moreover, with Huashu Huaizong heading to the southwest, someone had to replace him in presiding over the center of the army, and that person can only be Longqinba. Given his distance from us, I've already arranged a shield for him. As long as I wish it, this shield will continue to hold him back." Wang Chong indifferently said. "Buzz." Chun Shusun's shocked gaze moved back and forth between Wang Chong and the disordered Tibetan ranks. His jaw agape. "I didn't think that he's even able to do this sort of thing." Chun Shusun had long ago noticed that Wang Chong's orders were specifically targeted and timed, but he hadn't expected Wang Chong to be using these orders to control the movements of the Tibetan army. Huashu Huaizong was a great general of Yusang who had made his name through his astounding strength. He was one of the great authorities of the southwest, and Longqinba, as one of the 5 tiger generals under Huashu Huaizong, was also a most terrifying existence. Yet Wang Chong had succeeded in rendering both of them powerless. In this battle, this pair was too late in coming and incapable of approaching. Strategy and tactics at this level could be described as an art. This made Chen Shusun take a whole new look at his impression of the battlefield as a cold-blooded, cruel, and ruthless place. Chen Shusun had never imagined that one person's ability to command could reach this stage. "Let's go. We don't have that much time," Wang Chong said. With this order, all the infantry began to charge through the rain, with those who could seize any horse doing their utmost to seize one. Meanwhile, the mobile cavalry remained behind to cover the rear. "Move out." Once the last wave had left, Wang Chong and his officers quickly departed while the Tibetans were still in too much chaos to form any sort of effective counterattack. Wang Chong had expanded the halo of Dusk Stallion to its greatest extent, and this war halo was playing a critical role, allowing Wang Chong's forces to vanish into the night before the Tibetans from the other areas could arrive. Boom! It wasn't long after Wang Chong left that a massive explosion of blazing stellar energy burst through the rain, sending more than 20 Tibetan cavalry flying. Longkinba charged out of the rear, his face livid. "Out of my way!" Longkinba's furious roar resounded through the skies. Whoosh! As he looked in the direction that Wang Chong's forces had fled, Longkinba immediately jumped forward and seized a horse from a nearby Tibetan, easily pushing its former rider Tensum Zhang away. "Everyone, follow me. Anyone who dares to defy my order will be handled according to military law. Let's see how far these damn Tang can run." With this order, Longkinba charged out with a killing intent that surged to the heavens, mud and dirt flying in his wake. Several thousand Tibetan cavalry followed closely behind, the pounding of their hooves resounding through the dark night. "After them. I want all those bastards dead." Longkinba reached his right hand to his back and grabbed a massive scimitar, its hilt as wide as an average human palm. This was no ordinary Tibetan scimitar, but seemed in certain aspects rather similar to the horse-slaying sabers of the Central Plains. "Follow General. Anyone who dares to fall behind will be handled according to military law. Charge. Yusang needs no cowards. Everyone, follow me." The officers under Longkinba's command hollered their orders, their faces drenched by the rain. Under their command, Longkinba quickly gathered 7,000 to 8,000 men, and even more were gathering behind him. The air was filled with tension. The war horses continued to rumble forward, the Tibetans gathering to Longkinba's summons. The Annan Protectorate army had still not escaped its predicament. "General, we've come to help you." An army of 4,000 to 5,000 fully equipped soldiers galloped out from the rear, its commander shouting. They seemed to be from the southeast region. Longkinba clenched his teeth and bellowed, "Bastards, faster! Don't let them escape." "Yes, my lord." The commander's whispered voice came out of the darkness. The moment this person spoke, Longkinba felt the hairs on his body stand on end as an ill foreboding took root in his heart. The first words had been fine, but the tone of the second set of words had been mumbled and strange. Tibetans did not speak like this or use this sort of tone. But before Longkinba could continue on this line of thought, that group of soldiers had already come up from the rear and was now rapidly approaching him. He felt like there was a sharpness in his back, as if some object had locked onto him from afar. Longkinba's mind trembled as he realized. Damn it, it's the Tang. As if struck by a lightning bolt, Longkinba suddenly understood what was happening. The Tang. This Tibetan, with the strange tone of voice, was a Tang man. The Tang had been disguising themselves as Tibetans to launch surprise attacks not too long ago. But Longkinba hadn't expected them to be so cunning and daring as to leave a disguised army as they left. And this army was rapidly getting closer. This lot of bastards. Longkinba's face was twisted into a savage expression. His teeth clenched so hard that they seemed on the verge of breaking. His opponent's cunning and arrogance had already surpassed his imagination, and they seemed intent on resorting to any possible method. However, if they thought that these methods could work against him, they were being far too naive, only fooling themselves. "You things that don't even know your own strength, die for me." Longkinba gave a furious roar and immediately slashed out with his massive scimitar. Rumble! The world quaked as a massive dragon of black and gold manifested behind Longkinba. With a flick of its tail, it transformed into a majestic stream of saber energy. Boom! As the saber energy descended, the horses did not rear up as Longkinba expected. Instead, there was a boom as the saber energy was blocked. An excellent saber energy from General Long. Come! Take my fist! A vortex began to form in the air, expanding like a storm as it swept toward Longkinba. Wang Yen! Longkinba paled upon hearing this voice. But before he could react, another vigorous voice came from another direction. General Long, I am here as well. This voice was Shenyu Zhongtong's. It was an ambush. In an instant, Longkinba's face became as white as a sheet of paper. He had clearly seen Wang Yen and Shenyu Zhongtong leave, so he had never expected that they would remain behind to ambush him. Boom! There was an earth-shaking boom. Longkinba barely managed to bring up his saber energy in defense before he was sent flying by Wang Yen and Shenyu Zhongtong. And Longkinba's saber energy was not weak. As one of the 5 tiger generals, Longkinba had absolute confidence in his strength. If it were only Wang Yen or Shenyu Zhongtong, Longkinba would have remained fearless. But 2 of these veteran Tang generals completely dominated him. Bang! Tensum zhang away, Longkinba crashed into a rocky outcrop, smashing it into pieces. My lord! The sudden attack from this unexpected angle had left all the Tibetans dumbfounded. At this juncture, no one had expected the Great Tang to leave behind an army of disguised soldiers to ambush them in the rear. And the leaders of this ambush were Shenyu Zhongtong and Wang Yen. These 2 were both experts inferior only to Great General Huoshu Huizong. Just by fighting alone, they would have been able to last a long time, but now they were working together to ambush Longkinba. With this one strike, Longkinba was heavily injured. Protect my lord! Damn it! The Tang are too despicable. Stop them! Kill them! All the Tibetans instantly reacted, all of them shocked and enraged as they heedlessly charged at Shenyu Zhongtong and Wang Yen. But before they could charge over, the several thousand cavalry of the Annan Protectorate army stabbed into them like a sharp knife, cutting the Tibetan formation into 2. Kai-il! The stomping of hooves filled the air. The attack from the Annan Protectorate army had come from a completely unexpected direction. Even Longkinba had been caught by surprise, so how could the ordinary soldiers not be? Rumble! Warhorse crashing into warhorse and scimitar clashing against sword created a massive din unwillingly. The Tibetans began to slowly give ground. The army of 6,000 or 7,000 had been thrown into chaos by the Tang charge. Kill him! Both Shenyu Zhongtong and Wang Yen stared with cold eyes at the fallen figure of Longkinba. This fierce general of Yusang was the head of the 5 tiger generals. If they could kill him, they could definitely deal a massive blow to the morale of the Tibetan army. As mud and water went flying, these 2 commanders of the Great Tang Southwest launched a fatal strike at the head of the 5 tiger generals. Protect my lord! We can't let the Tang harm my lord! In an instant, all the Tibetan officers became extremely worried and led the surrounding soldiers in a mad and reckless charge against Shenyu Zhongtong and Wang Yen. Moo! In the air, the images of yaks began to appear, mixed with the images of the strange beasts from the legends of the plateau. Stellar energy covered the heavens, rumbling toward Wang Yen and Shenyu Zhongtong like countless dragons. Boom! Boom! In an instant, 2 majestic barriers of stellar energy rapidly expanded in the depths of the crowd. So domineering were these energies that they instantly shattered all the oncoming streams of stellar energy into pieces. Not only that, these 2 powerful stellar energies joined together and swept away everything. These madly charging Tibetan officers and the soldiers they led were sent flying like ragdolls. Aya! Screams rang out through the air. Even the brave and fierce Tibetans were no match for the 2 highest-ranked commanders of the Great Tang Southwest. With their obstructions blown away, these 2 generals plowed forward unhindered toward Longkinba. Huoshu Huizong isn't here, making this the best chance to kill Longkinba. Brother Genji, attack with all you have. Don't give him a chance. Shenyu Zhongtong's furious roar resounded through the skies. In Lion City, Longkinba had been a monstrous threat. This tiger general raised by the Great Snow Mountain Holy Temple was incredibly powerful and possessed all kinds of techniques. In terms of one-on-one combat, no one in the Tang army except for Shen Yuzhongtong or Wang Yan was a match for him, and the Tang army had never been able to do anything about him. But now Longqinba was alone, giving the Tang the best chance to kill him. Despite his astonishing strength, he would still die if he tried to fight the combined assault of Wang Yan and Shen Yuzhongtong. "Milord, move!" As Shen Yuzhongtong and Wang Yan struck with their lethal blows, a figure suddenly jumped out. Bang! Before anyone could see what was happening, Longqinba was pushed away. In that split second, a Tibetan officer had charged forward and pushed Longqinba aside. Longqinba reacted quickly, his palm quickly grabbing hold of a highland steed. With a flip of his body, he had mounted the horse. Hiya! Without even looking behind him, Longqinba urged the horse through the crowd and was instantly far away. If it were only one of Shen Yuzhongtong and Wang Yan, he would dare to exchange a few blows. But he was injured, and his death was certain if he tarried. Only great General Huashu Huizong could block the simultaneous strikes of that pair. Shen Yuzhongtong, Wang Yan, you won't be able to escape the southwest. I'll definitely tear both of you into pieces. Longqinba's enraged bellow traveled across the distance, but he continued to retreat at full speed. Meanwhile, the other Tibetan cavalry cast away any thoughts of survival and began to charge at the pair. "Protect my lord! Stop them!" Wang Yan ordered his own forces to respond. Compared to one-on-one combat, he was more skilled in army-on-army. Damn it! As Shen Yuzhongtong watched Longqinba escape and used the Tibetans to cover his retreat, his face twisted into a terrible grimace. His hand stabbed like steel chisels into the body of that Tibetan officer and smashed it against the rocky outcrop. Boundless stellar energy flowed into the body of the officer, shattering his meridians and organs, snuffing out his life. An excellent chance, completely wasted, Shen Yuzhongtong moaned with great reluctance. An influential general of Yusang like Longqinba was normally together with other fierce generals like Huashu Huizong and Daluan Ruozhen. If he hadn't been in such a rush to pursue the Annan Protectorate army, the Tang would have never had this sort of opportunity. With this chance missed, a future one would be even harder to create. No, I have to kill him. Shen Yuzhongtong hardened his heart. But just when he was preparing to pursue and deal with Longqinba once and for all, the situation suddenly changed. Rayura! The roar of a dragon soared up from the distance. This sound contained an endless might, creating a pillar of air that extended to the heavens through the rainstorm. With the pillar as the center, massive ripples began to spread out over the air. All the rain began to glisten and ripple, constantly being jolted outward. Huashu Huizong. Shen Yuzhongtong's expression sank as his heart quavered. In all of the southwest, only Huashu Huizong could possess such vigorous energy and have a voice that could move the air and open a path between heaven and earth. He's coming. Just like Chong'er anticipated, he's very fast. Wang Yan had been commanding the troops to scatter the Tibetans, but had at some point walked over. Huashu Huizong is currently making his way here, as is the rest of the army. It's inadvisable for us to stay here much longer. Once we scatter these soldiers a little more and use them to hinder our pursuers, our mission will basically be complete. Wang Yan glanced up at the sky as he spoke. The originally gloomy sky was now completely dark. This breakout from Lion City had consumed a great deal of time, and now that this fierce battle had done the same, it was very late at night. But though it was nighttime, the rain had still not lessened. The dark night and the pouring rain had given the Tang the best circumstances for their breakout. The Tibetans had already lost them a few times when they were pursuing them during the day, and now that the darkness greatly hindered their vision, it would be even more difficult for the Tibetans to find the tracks of the Annan Protectorate army. It didn't even matter that all of them were mounted. This breakout attempt had been a complete success. This was the analysis that Wang Chong had given to Wang Yan. There's nothing that can be done. Although I also want to have a life-or-death fight with Huashu Huizong, young Master Chong is correct. Now is not the time for our decisive battle, Shen Yuzhongtong said as he looked fiercely into the distance, his eyes bloodshot. Although he was unwilling, He still turned his horse around and left with Wang Yan. Everyone, hear my order. Quickly retreat. Although Shenyu Zhongtong wanted to kill Longqinba, he actually wanted to kill Huashu Huizong even more. In the Great Tang's southwest, this Yusang great general had always been the Annan Protectorate Army's greatest foe. With Shenyu Zhongtong and Wang Yan holding the rear, the Tang forces quickly disappeared into the stormy night. Where are they? Right after Shenyu Zhongtong's forces left, another stalwart figure, his aura as mighty as a mountain, appeared on the battlefield. Clang! A scimitar of refined iron dropped from the figure's right hand and into the ground, sending mud flying. A Tibetan officer bowed and replied, "Reporting to my lord, they have already gone." His entire body trembled in fear. "Who injured you?" Huashu Huizong turned his head to Longqinba. His face was dark and emotionless, but the thick streams of stellar energy flowing around his body had manifested into seething flames. Of the 5 elements, Huashu Huizong was a supreme expert of the most tyrannical and fierce fire element. The flames on his body allowed one to see very far through the darkness. Reporting to General, it was Shenyu Zhongtong and Wang Yan. Longqinba replied fearfully, lowering his head. Although the Tibetans were renowned for their valor and Longqinba could remain fearless even before powerful foreign enemies like Shenyu Zhongtong or Wang Yan, he felt a most profound dread before Great General Huashu Huizong, or perhaps one could call it respect. Huashu Huizong had made his name far earlier than Longqinba. Many years ago, his reputation had already been known throughout the upper reaches of the Ngari royal lineage. He was a true military general born through battle. Shenyu Zhongtong and Wang Yan? It seems that we've truly met an opponent this time. Even those two are listening to his orders. A frigid light gleamed in Huashu Huizong's eyes as he looked in the direction in which Shenyu Zhongtong's forces had left. Ah! Longqinba was stupefied, looking in confusion at Huashu Huizong with no idea of what the great general was saying. Planning to lure the tiger from the mountain, bringing me away from the center of the army, and then using an ambush to stop your pursuit and kill you in a single stroke. You don't think that Shenyu Zhongtong or Wang Yan could have come up with this idea, did you? Huashu Huizong sneered. He was forced to admit that he had made an error in judgment. His opponent was far smarter than he had imagined, even managing to take into account his own movements. Moreover, the breakout of an army was no easy task, especially when it involved almost 100,000 soldiers. Huashu Huizong had originally believed that he would make it in time regardless of what happened, but the enemy army had been extremely organized. The breakout, the defense, the counterattack, everything had gone smoothly, and there had been not a single sign of disorder throughout that massive undertaking. And that army of tens of thousands had descended the mountain and left with such speed. Not even Huashu Huizong could have accomplished this feat in such a short amount of time and left with such speed. Such a thing existed only in theory. His opponent's ability to command an army was almost miraculous, inconceivable. Huashu Huizong had lived on this world for many years, but this was his first time seeing a commander of this caliber. However, the more outstanding his opponent was in strategy and tactics, the more brilliant and transcendent, the greater and more vigorous Huashu Huizong's killing intent was. Longqinba was dumbfounded for a few moments. He had only been focused on killing the enemy, so his mind had truly not thought in this direction. It was true. The Yusang Empire had fought for so long against the Great Tang in the southwest that both sides were exceptionally familiar with the generals on the opposite side. Although Shenyu Zhongtong couldn't be described as mediocre or incompetent, he was also no adaptable schemer. Rather, he was the model of a general who could defend cities. As for Wang Yan, Longqinba had heard of his name before and personally experienced his style in Lion City. Although this general was skilled in both attack and defense, he was still a great Tang general who was better on the defense than the offense. Neither of this pair could have thought of this plan to swing back around and ambush the enemy. Then, my lord, what should we do now? They definitely haven't gone far. Why don't we chase after them? Longqinba asked, a fierce killing intent in his heart. A momentary lack of vigilance had almost ended with him dead at the hands of Shenyu Zhongtong and Wang Yan. No matter who the conductor behind the curtains was, That they were able to come up with such a plan filled Longkinba with the ardent desire to tear them to pieces. There's no need. But before Longkinba could think about how to find that hidden Tang commander, he was dumbstruck by the reply. Given how things are, just let them go. But, my lord, how can we just let them go? Longkinba's eyes flew open as he looked with surprise at Great General Huashu Huaitsong. The great general had always been hailed for his courage, so for him to let the Tang go despite them having not run very far away had truly surpassed Longkinba's expectations. This was not the great general's usual style. More importantly, Longkinba was extremely unwilling to accept this. It's late and raining hard. Where would you go and find them? In addition, in this weather, the might of cavalry is completely nullified. If my guess is correct, that Tang commander loves this sort of plan, so if we pursue, he'll definitely have laid even more traps for us. It's so dark that we won't be able to see them, and if there are any ambushes, we'll only be adding to our losses. Furthermore, they've already launched surprise attacks against us by disguising themselves as our troops. In this dark night, they could attack at any time. Do you know how to defend against that? With these final words, Huashu Huaitsong brought up the most important point. The Tang commander opposing them was skilled in schemes, a superb strategist and tactician. They were far above Shen Yuzhongtong, Wang Yan, and the other southwestern generals, with even himself falling prey to their schemes. More importantly, even Huashu Huaitsong had to admit that this method of disguising as the other side and constantly launching sneak attacks was incredibly difficult to defend against. Even he was hard-pressed to think of any good ideas. This was an army of 100,000, not 10 or 20,000. His opponents disguised were simply impossible to distinguish from his own troops. This was truly a most vexing strategy. But Longkinba stammered out. He had originally thought that one large-scale offensive would settle things, so this conclusion had caught him by surprise. But Longkinba had to admit that he had almost died back there, and in the darkness of the night it would probably be even easier to ambush him. Moreover, the opponent actually knew how to speak a little Tibetan. Wasn't it supposed to be that the people of the Great Tang didn't know how to speak Tibetan? Flinging out his right hand, Longkinba sent out a tyrannical stream of stellar energy smashing into the ground, blowing a pit around a zhang deep in the ground. It was clear that Longkinba could only helplessly accept Huashu Huaitsong's order. Be at ease. I never said anything about letting them go. Huashu Huaitsong's eyes stared into the darkness, exuding a cold light. The storm will end and the night will pass. Once the day returns and the rain ceases, not even that Tang commander's wondrous abilities will be able to do anything. A strategy he can use now might not be a strategy he can use later. Don't forget, we have the 300,000 soldiers of our ally Meng Shizhao. We'll have plenty of time to link up with the Meng Shizhao army and deal with the Tang. And besides, this was originally a war between the Great Tang and Meng Shizhao, so it should be their turn to put forth a little strength. This is also the Great Minister's intention. The Great Minister that Huashu Huaitsong spoke of was naturally Daluan Ruozhen. In all of the Ngari royal lineage, the only one who could order around Huashu Huaitsong, who could keep this valorous general on a tight leash, was the Ngari Great Minister. Longkinba hadn't expected this to be on the Great Minister's orders. Don't be so reluctant. If we can pay the smallest price for the greatest harvest, why shouldn't we? Don't forget, the goal of we warriors of Yusang is not merely the southwest, not merely the Anan Protectorate. An even greater war waits for us. We cannot lose too much on a single battlefield. Huashu Huaitsong indifferently said. Yes, my lord. Longkinba still felt a little unwilling, but when he heard those last words, he immediately bowed, a deep veneration in his heart. The southwest was only a corner of the Great Tang, and the great war that Huashu Huaitsong spoke of naturally wasn't this place, but the war between Yusang and the Great Tang. This was no secret between the high-ranking officers of the Tibetan plateau. A centipede could die, but it would never fall over. From the moment that Senpo decided to attack the Great Tang, the war between Yusang and the Great Tang had begun. This war in the southwest was merely the prologue to an even greater war. Although the Great Tang was on the decline and was no longer what it once was, it still possessed a massive, resplendent, and intimidating army. The Annan Protectorate was only one of the Great Tang's protectorates. Even though the Yusang Empire had already made its decision, all of its officers were still treating the war with extreme caution. A day early or a day late will still end up killing them. Let them struggle on death's door for a little longer. With these final words, Huashu Huizong turned his horse around and immediately returned. This undertaking could be described as a massive failure. The results achieved by an army of 100,000 had been completely different from expected. And this was not because the Tibetans were incompetent or Shen Yuzhongtong and the Annan generals were too strong, but because of the strategies and tactics utilized by the Tang. No one had expected this outcome, and the casualties were also rather large. Moreover, Huashu Huizong had vaguely noticed something from this battle that only he could handle. In comparison, chasing down Shen Yuzhongtong and the rest wasn't that urgent. After all, it was only a single day. They couldn't flee the southwest in such a short time. Huashu Huizong quickly vanished into the darkness. Behind him, the Tibetan army slowly began to move in the exact opposite direction of the one in which Wang Chong's forces had vanished. The battle through the rain had come to an unexpected end. Yet the air over the southwest remained fraught with tension, and even managed to grow even tenser. In the pouring rain, several large trees spread out their twisted roots into the muddy earth. This rare rainstorm meeting the dirt had made almost all of the southwest into a swamp. And in a place that no one could see, the air was tinged with killing intent. Time slowly passed, and all remained quiet. There was no sound except the falling of the rain. After some time, suddenly, the ground loosened as its surface bulged. Soon after, a muscular man came out of the ground like a fish leaping out of water. What's going on here? The Tibetans actually left. Su Shiping gazed in the direction of the mountain range, confusion on his face. The war between Yusang and the Great Tang was past the point of reconciliation. Given the standpoint of Yusang and Huashu Huizong's temper, it was truly out of character for the Tibetans to not give chase. It's hard to say. Don't get careless. The Tibetans might just be pretending to be slow to make us let down our guard. The Tibetans are renowned for their courage, so they would never so easily give up the chase. Su Anduin also stood up out of the muddy water. This sort of camouflage was difficult to endure, as it required painting one's body with filthy mud, even the chinks in the armor. Although this sort of disguise truly was difficult to detect, it drenched one's body, and smearing a layer of mud over oneself was truly an unbearable task. There's no need to think about it. They've already left. A figure slid down from a nearby tree trunk. The tips of Wang Chong's feet lightly pressed against the ground as he descended. He wore heavy armor and an extremely vigilant expression. The Tibetans can make feint attacks and assume holding positions, but no matter how much they stand guard, they can't hide the sounds of horse hooves. Even if they could manage to muffle the hooves of their horses in such a short time, they can't stop their horses from neighing. It's not possible to do this with the number of horses they have, and it's not the Tibetan style. As Wang Chong spoke, his brow furrowed. I originally thought that the Tibetans would pursue, but it looks like I underestimated him. Huashu Huizong has probably predicted that I laid an ambush and halted any pursuit. Moreover, cavalry aren't good at fighting in the darkness, much less in the rain. Huashu Huizong must have known that the circumstances did not favor him and that we had prepared, so he decided to just give up. I thought that Huashu Huizong was just a courageous and fierce general, but it seems I thought too little of him. Purely from this decision, I can confirm that Huashu Huizong is one of our greatest foes in the southwest. Although the enemy's retreat was to the Tang's advantage, the enemy retreating after being defeated and retreating of their own volition were two completely different things. No matter what, the result before him was not a good one for him or for the Great Tang. It's an even thornier problem than I imagined, Wang Chong said to himself as he looked toward the southwest in the past. He had only known that great General Huashu Huizong was the mortal foe of Xianxia Jianxiong, but he had never known specifically why this was the case. Now, however, Wang Chong had begun to understand. Let's go. Wang Chong, standing beside two large trees, waved his hand. Splash. This single action caused a massive transformation. In this deserted area in which only Wang Chong, Su Shiping, and Su Onduin seemed to be standing. Countless figures began to emerge from the ground. In just a few moments, thousands of soldiers had crawled out from the ground, either holding weapons or wiping the mud from their bodies. And farther in the distance, even more of the Anan Protectorate army emerged from the scattered hills. Huishu Huizong's judgment had been correct. Wang Chong really had prepared a large trap for him to charge into, a trap that involved 40 to 50,000 soldiers. These forces, coupled with the returning cavalry and the reserve troops, were truly enough to have Huishu Huizong drink his fill. But now none of it could be used. Pass on my order. There's no need to worry about the Tibetans behind us. All troops should march at full speed. We only have one day. After today, Huishu Huizong will rejoin with the Mengshi Zhao army, and their combined forces will definitely march at full speed to catch up with us. This period of time is our only chance. No matter what, we have to reach that place within this time. If we can't reach it, then the only thing awaiting all of us will be death. That place is our only chance to live. Wang Chong surveyed the officers gradually gathering around him, his voice grave. The pursuit of Huishu Huizong and the Tibetan army had temporarily come to an end, but for Wang Chong, this battle was far from over. This time, however, his opponent was no longer Huishu Huizong's armored cavalry, but the Anan Protectorate army itself. Escaping from Lion City and successfully breaking out only meant gaining a chance to struggle on death's door. Under the resplendent success of the two parts of the Anan Protectorate army rejoining were far too many dangers. Without the protection of Lion City, without the protection of the Dark Night, with no once-in-a-decade storm, no natural barriers, the Great Tang army was no match for the Mengshi Yusang army. More importantly, there were no more provisions in the southwest. Nay! War horses neighed as the Tang army, under the cover of the rain, swiftly traveled to the northeast. For the first time in this war, the southwest finally welcomed a peaceful night. The last peaceful night. Rumble. A dazzling bolt of lightning wriggled across the dark clouds hanging over the capital like a snake. Unlike the storm shrouding the southwest, the clouds over the capital only had lightning and thunder, with no rain. This sort of storm was known amongst the common people as empty lightning. This sort of weather had persisted over the capital for several days now. The dangers in the southwest, the imminent fall of the front lines, and the intense battles taking place in Longxi, Anbei, and Anshi had made the atmosphere tense and nervous. Not since the founding of the dynasty had such a situation ever occurred. Eunuch Gao, I was wondering if you could assist me in passing on a message to His Majesty. Just say that this lowly minister has a request. Deep within the imperial palace, in the forbidden grounds, a man with a square face and large ears, dressed in the silk robes of an imperial eunuch, stood in front of a set of jade steps. His complexion was smooth and amiable, his body plump, making him appear much like the Sakyamuni Buddha descended to earth. In front of him, a civil minister and a leader of the imperial army were kneeling on the ground. Eunuch Gao, I would trouble you to pass a message to the sage emperor. The southwest is in critical danger. Our 200,000 soldiers of the imperial army are willing to go to the southwest. Danger besets us from every side, and there are no troops that we can use for the moment. Mobilizing the imperial army is the best method. Sir Eunuch, an appropriate method exists for everything. One of the kneeling figures struck his head to the floor. The commander of the imperial army, Zhao Fengchen. The war in the southwest had persisted for some time now. The several thousand clan experts and hired warriors that Wang Chong had led to the south had vanished like foam on the waves, leaving not a single ripple behind. In the view of many people, his end was obvious. To the war in the southwest, several thousand soldiers was like a cup of water to a burning cart. Without a sufficiently large army, trying to deal with the 500,000 soldiers of the Mengshi Yusang army was like trying to beat a rock with an egg. Thus, many people had known how Wang Chong's forces would end up from the very beginning. Although they admired his courage, this was not a wise decision. In the end, one could only rely on the imperial court's army. The silk-robed eunuch smiled and replied, Ha ha ha, Commander Zhao. Please, do not speak such confused words. If the 200,000 soldiers of the imperial army go south, who will protect the capital? What if the foreign cavalry launch a surprise attack? Do you want the Sage Emperor to be surrounded by enemies? Although the Sage Emperor possesses wondrous abilities and is not worried about such things, will we, as ministers, still have the face to continue living? In the inner grounds of the imperial court, the only person who had the surname Gao and was treated with such respect by a civil minister and the commander of the imperial army could only be the Sage Emperor's trusted aide, the director of the inner court, Gao Lisher, eunuch Gao. In the inner court, whether young or old, eunuch or maid, if they had the surname Gao, they would have to change their surname. Thus, only one person in the inner grounds of the palace could be respectfully addressed as eunuch Gao. The Gao lineage had served 3 generations of emperors, and they had been hailed as loyal ministers. In the Great Tang and within the palace, they had a transcendent status, far above any normal minister. Eunuch Gao is correct, we are confused. But, Sir Eunuch, time does not wait. If the Annan Protectorate army is wiped out, the nearly 1 million civilians of the southwest will be plunged into disaster, and the Mengshi Yusang army will easily make their way northward. In the end, they will still be directly threatening the capital. As ministers, we naturally have to beat back the enemy outside the gates of the empire. If we let foreign soldiers threaten the people, what right do we have to still live on this world? 2 of Yusang's royal lineages have fully mobilized this time. Next to Zhao Fengqian, the more than 70-year-old imperial censor Duan Chao side. Enemies surrounded the Great Tang, and the Bureau of Military Personnel, the Bureau of Personnel, and the Bureau of Revenue were doing all they could to recruit more soldiers, but no matter how much energy they consumed, the amount of provisions, weapons, and war horses needed to fight against the 500,000 soldiers of the Mengshi Yusang army was no small number. It was not something that could be gathered in a short time. War had always been a system, not a simple question of moving troops around. But time would not wait. Every day, more bad news would arrive from the south, and the situation of the empire had worried everyone from the highest minister to the lowest commoner. The Great Tang was facing an unprecedented upheaval. All Tang people had a heartfelt love for their country, so they couldn't help but worry about these problems. The imperial court currently spent every day discussing countermeasures, and the debates were endless. There was an endless stream of ministers who wanted to enter the inner court and see the Sage Emperor, but all of them were refused. Despite this crisis that involved all the Great Tang, the supreme and most esteemed existence of the Great Tang, the Sage Emperor, had still not given his stance. No one knew what the Sage Emperor was thinking. He had stated no opinion and made no decision. Imperial Censor Duan. Hearing this old imperial censor's words, eunuch Gao couldn't help but give a long sigh. I know that you are sincere, but His Majesty is currently resting and long ago ordered that no one was able to disturb him. I can also do nothing about it. The officials instantly looked at each other in dismay. This excuse had already been used to stave off quite a few people. Eunuch Gao, just what is His Majesty's stance? What is going on here? His Majesty was not like this before. The old imperial censor suddenly raised his head, his gaze as sharp as a knife. The Sage Emperor was hailed as the most enterprising and ambitious sovereign of the Central Plains. His talent for strategy, incredible resolve, and piercing gaze had allowed the Great Tang to sweep over the world and achieve an unprecedented golden age. In the past, the talented Sage Emperor would also seem to have foresight on what was going on, no matter the concern. Without any need for the court to debate, he would already know what to do. Everyone had happily accepted his decisions. But now, the Southwest was engulfed in the flames of war. The Annan Protectorate army had been defeated, Li Zhengyi had been ambushed and killed in battle, and all the protectorates in every direction were under attack. And yet the Sage Emperor continued to show no sign of movement. Such a thing had never happened before. As an old imperial censor who had served 2 generations of sovereigns, Duan Chao truly did not want to see this. Ah, Imperial Censor Duan, don't you already know about that matter? Ah! At these words, the old censor's body trembled as he remembered. His mouth opened as if wanting to say something, but eunuch Gao raised his hand to remind him to remain silent. The past is the past. As long as both you and I know what's going on, it's fine. As for the Southwest, you don't need to worry. His Majesty has his ideas. Just because His Majesty has not made his stance clear does not mean that he is not paying attention to the situation in the Southwest. Old censor, you've also served His Majesty for many years, so you should understand this, right? Duan Chao's body shivered as he gave a long sigh. As long as His Majesty had made a judgment, then he could ask for nothing more. This was his greatest harvest from this trip. I understand. Many thanks, Sir Eunuch. General Zhao, let us leave. Duan Chao helped up the confused Zhao Fengchen and quickly left the palace. A gentle breeze blew through the halls, causing little chimes to sway. Eunuch Gao kept his hands enclosed in his sleeves and a smile on his lips, his eyes watching Duan Chao's group leave. After a while, once everyone had left, the smile on Eunuch Gao's lips slowly faded, and a long sigh escaped them. Worries clouded his brow as Eunuch Gao quickly entered the sacred hall. The golden dragons depicted on the layers of curtains were so lifelike that they seemed about to jump from the curtains, and that most esteemed figure towered deep within those curtains. Although he did nothing but sit there, he exuded an energy that placed him above all living beings, making him seem like a god revered by all people. But for some reason, that massive and powerful energy that seemed to transcend all experts of the world seemed a tiny bit weak in Eunuch Gao's eyes. However, Eunuch Gao quickly flung this thought aside. Whether His Majesty was the aloof sage emperor or the prince from back then, in his heart, he would always be Eunuch Gao's most revered, admired, and beloved existence in the world. Your Majesty, is it truly okay for us to do nothing about the Southwest? In that empty hall, Eunuch Gao suddenly kneeled, the sound of his knees striking the floor echoing throughout the silent palace.